Good morning, Year 11. Bondi's going to kick us off with a lesson today. He's being such a good boy. He had a haircut, so you can see his eyes, and he's sitting here because I'm tempting him with some food. So, eat this treat if you love society and culture. Good boy. Now, can you show them how clever you are? Can you shake? Can you shake, Bondi? Shake. Good boy. There you go. Oh, not all of it. Good boy. Very good. You show them how clever you are. Ready? You can drop. You can drop. Good boy. Good boy. How cute does he look with his new haircut? Anyway, enough of that. You can go play now. No more. All gone. All gone. Good boy. He's all gone. No more. There's no more. Okay. So, what we're going to look at today is research methods. Now, this is something I have been promising you has been coming for a long time now, so here it finally is. Now, this is in a different order than we usually do in the syllabus, but I think this order is much better because now you guys have a really firm core understanding of all the course concepts that we do here in society and culture. And when we look back to the very start, when we've talked about the three pillars here, we're pretty good on concepts, and we've looked at the content now and the types of content that we're going to explore in this subject, and now we're up to the research part. Now, similar to concepts, a lot of the research is about practicing and rote learning the material required. So similar how concepts here, we've got so many here. In research methods, there's going to be a lot of different types of research, and the benefit for us knowing that and rote learning it and practicing it on things like concept cards as well is that they get asked as multiple choice questions every year in the HSC, and they're also always asked in short answers every year in the HSC, not to mention you need to understand it all for when you do your major work. The PIP next year, which is 40% and is worth 40%, but you will be using a lot of the research methods we're going to talk about today. So without further ado, we're going to look at lesson 13 today, which ranges from pages 47 to 51. That should say 51, not 50. So if we can highlight this whole shebang bong and date it, whichever dates you do it or what parts you do it, and we'll get started, page 47. Alrighty, so what we've got here is two syllabus stop points. First one is explore the differences between quantitative and qualitative research, and our second one is to determine the strengths and weaknesses of quantitative and qualitative methods for different research situations. So you can do both of those things today and more. Before I get into what is qualitative and quantitative research and the differences between them, I want to turn your attention here. I just want to give you guys a little bit of a power hour session on the really important aspect of research in society and culture. So social, and you should be highlighting this, social research is paramount to success in this course. So paramount means it is absolutely essential, vitally important. Okay, without it, you won't be able to achieve a band 6 because it represents almost a third of all of what we do, essentially. So things to consider when looking at social and cultural research. The first thing is obviously your PIP. So your major work that you do in Year 12, you're going to start that in Term 4, is a social research project. You choose the topic, but it is worth, and you should highlight this, a whopping 40% of your final course mark in the HSC. So 40%, that's almost half. Now you might think that's a little scary, but again, we had this talk at the start of the year. Strategically, if we think about the triangle again, 40% of your course mark is going to come from the PIP, 30% is going to come from that HSC exam, and the other 30% is going to come from your school assessment marks. Now, most subjects have a 50-50 split between exam and assessment. Because we have this third pillar, you are effectively in control of 70% of your HSC course mark. which is a considerable amount more than most other subjects. What I say and why you're in control of it is 30% of your assessment tasks marks, you are 100% in control of that. You know what they are, when they're coming, you've got me to help and guide you and give you feedback on it. It's the same with the PIP. Now, I don't mark the PIP. Again, I know I've told you this, but I'll reiterate it. We send that off to NESA and they mark it. So the beauty of that is, 1, I can tell you what a Band 6 PIP looks like and what it doesn't look like. 2, we can give you exemplars and different examples to think about and look at. You've got 3, you've got 9 months to write it from start to finish, so you've got copious amount of times to do it. It's considered an extra part of it's considered like a whole nother subject. So what I mean by that is, so our exam is only 2 hours because of it, but say most topics or most courses have 4 key things or key areas that you need to study. In Year 12, we've only got 3 key areas that we need to study. The 4th one's considered your PIP, which you do. So we're going to do that over the course of 9 months, starting from term 4 onwards. So the important thing about research with the PIP is that you're going to be conducting all different kinds of research methods. So it's really important we know what they are. And it's really important that we know that where to use them and how to use them, which we are going to get into. So in order to do all of that, you need a fundamental understanding on all the research methodologies and how to apply them effectively. Okay, 40% of your final course mark, and you're in control of it, which is really good. I think it's a big benefit. The second part is the HSE. So the first section of your HSE paper is multiple choice and short answer responses. Now we know that most of them, you know what, I'm going to show you right now. So if I go 2020 Society and Culture HSC, let's just look at last year's, for example. We could look at any of them, but if we just look at last year's, the very first question is about research. Boom. Then you got a concept. Here, third one is about research. 4th one is about research. 6th one is about research. And then we don't have any short answer research questions there, but let's try 29. So you get the idea. So there was at least 4 or 5 marks in that HSC paper that was just based on research. Here again, we've got a research one. That's not. Research. So we've got 3 in the multiple choice. Again, none there. I'm telling you, there will be a short answer one somewhere. But again, look, research. You have to analyze statistics there. Boom, short answer question. School principal has proposed increasing the number of hours of sport for each student. Justify one research method to investigate parents' views. So you get given a scenario and then you have to apply a research methodology to it. So yes, it's very important to understand this. So in this HSC, there's almost 8 marks allocated to just pure research and nothing else. Okay, so it's really important that we know and understand it. And then lastly, obviously, is your assessment task. So every single one of your assessment tasks this year is going to assess research methodologies in some capacity. Okay, so it's really important, again, for our course marks this year that we understand it as well. So they're the 3 main pillars there, and indeed some of your assessment tasks in Year 12 as well, like your trial HSC, for example, will have stuff in it. So as Dwight says, all you need is love? No, you don't need love. False, you need research. So let's get some research into you. Alrighty, types of research. So, pardon me. There are 2 main types. There's what we call quantitative and qualitative. Now, before I get too in-depth in this, it is a really good idea that you will need to get your concept cards out, or blank study cards, or palm cards, whatever you're calling them. You're going to be writing a butt ton of concept cards to do with research. Okay, so I want you to get them out now if you haven't already. Now, write one quantitative and write one qualitative. And once you've written that on the front of the palm card, what I want you to do is don't flip it over yet, straight under it. I want you to write in brackets what I'm about to tell you. So we're going to break these words down so that we know. Now, obviously quantitative and qualitative sound very similar, but here's how I remember to pick them apart, and this is how I want you to think of it. So on your quantitative card, quantitative sounds like quantity. So you think about numbers. So in your brackets, I want you to write, think about numbers sounds like quantity. Okay, so it's like how much. Okay, so it's all very much about numbers and statistics. Once you have done that, get your qualitative card out, and in brackets, qualitative sounds like quality. So it's more in depth. And so it doesn't involve numbers. So it's more in-depth, it's more about personal experiences and in-depth knowledge. Okay? So that's the sort of two pillars there. So what quantitative research is research that involves numbers, graphs, analysing statistics, looking at data in tables. It's very much concerned with what and how many, whereas qualitative research, in a nutshell, is all about trying to understand people's opinions about things, trying to understand what we call subjective experiences. So what we mean by subjective experiences is that there's no right or wrong answer. Say in quantitative, the number's either 10 or it's 20. There's no if or buts about it. Whereas if we get a qualitative answer or response, there's different ways to interpret it. Someone might have a different point of view on it. They might have a different perspective or grown up in a different culture, and therefore they've got different views on things. So neither of the people giving their opinion are wrong, they're just different. And so that's why qualitative is associated with the why and how. So in a nutshell, that's kind of how I want you to differentiate between the two. Quantitative is about quantities and numbers. Qualitative is about quality and in-depth information. So we're going to go tackle these one at a time. So we'll start with quantitative. So on the back of that concept card that you've just used now, I want you to write this on the back of it. Now, you may end up having to have two quantitative cards, just because there's a lot of information you want to put in here. Okay, so this is essentially a definition here, if you want to get both of these as separate dot points on the back of that first card. Okay, so on the back of the first card, get these 2 dot points in. So the first one reads, enables the collection of very specific data from a sample of the relevant population. The findings may then be extrapolated for the whole population under study. So a few things here. So it enables the collection of very specific data. So say, for example, you might put out what's called a questionnaire, or guys might have heard the word survey, and a lot of common questions they ask you in the survey first is usually what's your age, what gender you identify as. So that's a very specific data that they can then calculate a percentage of and use that as a frame of reference when they analyse their data. The findings may then be extrapolated for the whole population under study. So essentially, you get, say, 100 people, because you're not going to survey everyone in the world or something. You might get 100 people, and that's what would be considered a sample of the relevant population, and you can then use that data to account for the whole population under study if you get enough varied subjects. Now, the word extrapolated, what that means is you take information from one place and you expand on it and how do I put this? You use that information to create more meaning. So if I'm extrapolating data say I said 50% of males in this study indicated that social media was giving them mental health issues. If you extrapolated that data, and you can refer it to somewhere else. So you're taking it from one place and you're putting it into another. So that's kind of our first point. The second point I want you to get there on that card is that researchers collect data that can be measured, counted, or quantified. Quantified just means the ability to be counted, if you want to write that in brackets. And that can result in a statistical report. And again, the focus is on what and how many. So that's the two key definitions of quantitative research there. That should go on your first palm card of it. The second palm card, I want you to get a new one now. Again, I want you to write quantitative on the front of it, but I want you to write quantitative, and then in brackets underneath that, I want you to write strengths, because remember our dot point is looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the methods. So your first card is going to be a definition essentially. Your second card is about strengths, and then your third card, when we get to that, is going to be on the weaknesses. So this is about quantitative strengths. So what I want you guys to do is the dot points I'm highlighting right now, they're the strengths. Okay? So write those down and I'll talk them through as we go. So the first strength of quantitative research is that it produces easily quantified and tabulated data. So essentially, quantified means the ability to be counted, and tabulated means you can put it in a table. So that's a strength of it. So if you do an online survey, for example, and or a Google form or something, right? If you ask a dot point question, when you look at the results, you can get the percentage of people that have said what it is, and the technology is going to count it for you, and then you can then put it into an Excel spreadsheet and put it in a table like that. It's really easy. So that's definitely a strength of it. Another strength is that information collected by counting is able to be collated into percentages and then represented by tables and graphs. So the other key strength of it is that it can be collated into percentages. So collated just means they get all this big data and then they are able to put it into a small percentage that's easy to read and manage. So they get something big and they make it smaller. That's kind of what collating is. You're sorting it into different and more achievable, manageable chunks. And it's really easy to do that because they're numbers. And then, of course, you can put it into tables and graphs again. So that's another strength. A third strength here is that quantities and trends can be identified and comparisons can be made easily. So that first part, you might notice when you pick apart all the percentages in your questionnaire or survey, you might find that, okay, 90% of males said that they agree with the following statement, whereas only 40% of females agreed with the following statement. So you can then, using those numbers in quantities, you can establish trends. So you might think, okay, so why is it that almost 90% of males agree with such and such, and why is it that less than half of all females don't agree with that statement? So you can look at different trends just based off numbers and identify those. And then the second part of that is comparisons can be easily made. So let's say you're doing a research on, like we said, just using social media or mental health. If your survey said that 60% of males and females experience a mental health issue in their lifetime, you can compare your data with secondary research that you might have got from Headspace or Beyond Blue or something like that. So you can compare your data with other people's data and other people's research really easily, and that can just strengthen your research claims to back up your data. Or it might challenge, or your data might challenge their data, because they might have only found that 10% of people do, but yours has found that 60% of people do. So you can then maybe explain the differences and why there. So you can make comparisons easily with quantitative research. Another strength. Here, it quantifies the findings in numerical data, tables, graphs, and diagrams. So again, we're just hounding on about being able to put the information into easy to read tables, graphs, and diagrams. So Google Forms will do that for you as well. They'll give you like little pie charts of the percentages of people that agree with such and such. They can give you column graphs and bar graphs as well. It just makes things easier to read. Like, would you rather see a bunch of percentages and numbers down a screen, or would you rather look at something like a pie graph or a column graph where it's all organized and it's got colors to differentiate the information? So that makes it easier. And then the last strength is that you can have a structured collection or what we call a structured data collection instrument with close-ended or rating scale questions. So a rating scale question is something like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you agree with the following statement? Or 1 to 5, how likely you to do it? So rather than just getting a yes or no answer, you can get the degree to which someone agrees with something. And so that's what they mean by a data collection instrument. So you can, it's not just about yes or no and specific numbers. You can actually gauge and go a bit more, I guess, in depth by having a scale. So that's another strength. So they're the strengths, okay, in yellow. You now need to get your third concept card, and you're going to write quantitative on the front, and then in brackets underneath it write weaknesses. So these are the weaknesses of quantitative research. Sorry, I'll put it in blue. Pardon me. So the first weakness is that it does not allow the researcher to interact closely or personally with those being questioned. The process is impersonal and as objective as possible. So the idea with you're not being able to interact closely, a lot of or most quantitative data is again done via technology, things like Google Forms or SurveyMonkey. You as a researcher aren't interacting with the person. So say you're asking a question about mental health or something via Google Forms. If you were to do that, say in an interview one-on-one, you would be able to read their body language, the tone of their expression when they're talking to you, and that can give you more information about what it is that they're saying, because it has all those, I guess what we would call qualitative inflections on there, whereas you don't get that when you do quantitative data. So you're not interacting closely or personally, and so that is considered a weakness because there could be more information there that you could gather, but you're just simply not getting because of the nature of the research. And then the other one, or the second main weakness, is that it relies heavily on the researcher's ability to develop a non-biased set of research questions or items in order to record data with the selected sample. So you've got the other weakness is that you can be biased in your questions. So for example, here's how you could be biased in your questions. Let's say you've got your survey up and you write it on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you agree with the following statement? And you write, the government is always wrong about mental health, and you only put option 5 up, for example. Okay, so that would be, I know that's a bizarre example, but that's an example of how you could have a biased question. Or your question might be, you might give a stat or something that says 50% of people across the world think that governments don't do enough about mental health. Why do you think governments don't do enough about mental health? That's like a loaded question. So rather than saying, do you agree with that statement, or just getting their take on it in a non-biased way, your presupposition of that question is that they already aren't doing enough. Why do you think they're not doing enough? So you've given them a loaded question. So it relies on the researcher's ability not to do that. Now, there's examples I gave are quite strong, but you guys might find when you start to write your own that sometimes you might be a little bit biased towards your topic. So you've got to make sure you're as what we could say as objective as possible. But yeah, so that's another weakness of quantitative research. So you should have the 3 cards. Your first card should have been this top bit. Your second card should have been here, and your third card should have been there. So that was the definition That was the strength, that was the weaknesses. So we're now going to do the same with qualitative. So get your first qualitative card out that you've already worked on and write this on the back of it. So this is our first one. So the first thing with qualitative research, again quality, in depth, is that it relies on the researcher's interpretive skills to understand the often complex and detailed data gathered. So that's part of the definition. So when we say interpretive skills, because say a qualitative research method might be interviewing someone, you have to be able to interpret their body language, like I said earlier, the tone of voice, as well as what they're saying. So that can be complex and it can be detailed. And if you're trying to then extrapolate that on a research report, say with quantitative data, it's much easier just to say 10% of people said this. Whereas when you're if you did it qualitatively in an interview, you might say, this person said this, but this person said that, but then this person had a point that counted all of them. So it's a lot more difficult to be able to translate that onto a research paper than it is just to write a number, simply. So that's one of the characteristics of it as part of the definition. And then the second part is that researchers, or what's the purpose, I guess, of qualitative research, and that's to gather an in-depth understanding of an issue by way of open-ended questions, non-statistical research techniques, so things like interviews, or value-based observations. A qualitative investigation focuses on why and how, so they're the more in-depth understanding there. So when we ask open-ended questions, it's like, why do you think that, or how do you feel about that? So like, let's say we ask them a question about, on a scale of 1 to 5, why do you rate the government's response to mental health? Sorry, it's just my go-to example today. You might then ask them, well, why do you think that? And that's an open-ended question. Whereas in a quantitative, you're purely focused on the number and the statistic of it. Whereas qualitative, again, we're more in depth. So you have those open-ended questions, whereas quantitative, you have the closed-ended questions, the yes or no or rating type questions. So that's the two sort of definition or descriptors that pull apart qualitative. I'm now going to highlight the strengths of qualitative research in yellow. So on your second card, I want you to write qualitative, and then in brackets underneath it, you can write strengths. Okay, so these are the strengths, and I want you to get this on the back of that card. So the strength is that usually it's a small sample of the population and it's not randomly selected. So a strength there is that you generally are picking who you want to interview, or you're picking who you want to research with or conduct the research on. And the reason that you're picking it is so it's relevant to your area of study. So like, let's say for example, we're looking at that mental health example. I would probably want to interview maybe a psychologist, someone who's an expert in the field. I would then probably want to interview someone that has mental health issues and problems. Whereas if I randomly selected two people, one of them say a garbage collector and the other one's the richest bloke on earth, I'm not going to get as good data from those two people as I would have if I picked the psychologist and the mental health sufferer, right? So that's a strength, that you get to essentially pick your sample. Another strength is that it is an interactive process. So you might have a list of questions, for example, when you're doing an interview, but they might say something in one of their answers that is on topic, but you haven't written a question. So you might ask a follow-up question on the fly to help them go into even more detail about something they said. Whereas if it's quantitative and you've just given them a survey, there's no option to do that, or for them to expand on their opinion about something if you want to specifically talk about what it is that they said. So that's really quite a good strength, that it's an interactive process. The third strength is that it's a narrative report with conceptual description of behaviours, values, attitudes, and beliefs. So you don't get these kind of you don't get this kind of information from quantitative. You simply don't get their behaviour, values, attitudes, or beliefs, again because it's more in depth. So that's another strength. A fourth strength is that you can use direct quotations from research participants as evidence. So In quantitative, where you use numbers, you can quote someone. So say you interview that psychologist and they just say something in one sentence that is absolutely on the ball, on the money. You can use a quote and directly quote what they said. So that's a really good strength there as evidence. And then the other one is the exploration of subjective experiences. So that idea that you can't really ascertain someone's feelings about something if you're asking them closed-ended numerical questions, but if you're in an interview, you can explore their subjective and cultural experiences. They can, go into depth about their story. You can get the full background information, the context of it, and then you can apply meaning to it. So that's a really good strength there. We're on to our third card now. I've just realized I haven't actually changed the my little Mr. Brown Productions thing before I started recording. So I'm going to try and scroll up a bit, and I'm hopeful that that doesn't now cut you off. So this is our third card. These are our weaknesses for qualitative. So qualitative relies heavily on the researcher's interpretive skills to understand the complexities of the findings. Okay, so that's a weakness because one, that can be time consuming. But you might interpret someone wrong. You might think you've interpreted it right, but you really haven't. And so that's a weakness there of the research method there as well. And that they can be really complex. So again, it's more time consuming. And if you're not, I guess, fit to really understand the complexity of the situation, it may be hard to then write that into a research report. So that's one weakness. The other weakness is that analysis of qualitative data can be more challenging, so it's harder to do, and it's more time consuming than looking at numbers and collating them into tables. Okay, so that's another thing. It's more time consuming and difficult to conduct. So that's another weakness. So with that there done, you should have 3 cards with the following information on it. Again, green was the definition. Yellow was the strengths, blue was the weaknesses. So I'm just going to go and unhighlight those. So once you've done that, we're going to move on to the next table here. So maybe you want to pause this video and have a bit of a stretch or a break, and then come back. So the next part here of this video is we're going to be looking at research methods. So we've talked about here the types of research, quantitative and qualitative, and here we're going to talk about the actual research methods that you do, which are quantitative and qualitative. So I've put them into 2 tables here for you, a list of quantitative research methods and a list of qualitative research methods. Now there's only 2, can be considered both quantitative and qualitative depending on how you go about it, but we'll go through that there together.